Hi, and thanks for stopping by my YouTube channel. My name is Chad Bird. I'm a scholar in residence at 1517. 1517 is a Christian nonprofit that specializes in getting the good news out there about our freedom and forgiveness in Jesus Christ. As a scholar in residence, I teach mainly the Old Testament, and my specialization is in teaching the gospel with an Old Testament accent. So my goal is to teach all about Christ, all about the good news, but to do so from that perspective of the Old Testament. Now, to do that, for instance, on this channel, I offer longer and shorter videos in which I unpack the scriptures with a focus upon Christ. So, on one of the playlists, you're going to find a series of videos called Reading the Gospels Through Hebrew Eyes, in which for the last few years, I've taken sections from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I've looked at those from the perspective of the Old Testament to ask how the Old Testament can help us to better understand what Jesus is teaching in the Gospels. You'll also find shorter videos called the Bible Study in Brief, where for about 90 seconds or so, I'll take a biblical text and I'll look at the Hebrew, I'll look at the Greek, and I'll unpack that theology and then apply it to our lives. Besides the longer and the shorter videos that you'll find here on my YouTube channel, if you're interested in podcast, I have 3 different podcasts that I'm involved in. One is an ongoing podcast called 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. And for about 7 or 8 years, my co-host Daniel Emery Price and I have been basically providing a podcast commentary on the Old Testament, beginning with Genesis 1, and then working our way through, well, we're in Esther right now. So we've done basically everything from Genesis to Esther. So if you're looking for an approach to the Old Testament that is explicitly Christian, that's asking how is Christ teaching us through Genesis or Exodus, Leviticus, or whatever it might be, then check out 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. Another ongoing podcast is called Hidden Streams. This is a devotional podcast. It's dropped weekly. And what happens in Hidden Streams is that we have a psalm that's read, and then I provide about a 5-minute reflection upon that psalm, a devotional in nature. And that's followed by original music that's composed to fit with that psalm. So that's called Hidden Streams. And then I've also been involved in a podcast that's finished. It's a completed podcast called Field Guide to the Bible, in which I and 2 of my friends, Eric Sorensen and Daniel Emery Price, we 3 took the entire biblical message from Genesis to Revelation, and we condensed it down into 20-something episodes in order to introduce the entire biblical story, the entire salvation story, to people who may not be well-versed in the scriptures. They may not know anything about the Bible. So this is a field guide to that Bible. So someone who's new to the faith or just wanting a basic review of the entire salvation story can find that in our podcast, A Field Guide to the Bible. And all 3 of those are available on any podcast app. In addition to the videos that you'll find here and to the podcast, I also have authored a number of books, one with Erdmans called Night Driving, 2 with Baker, and then several with 1517 Publishing. So, for instance, I have a book called The Christ Key, Unlocking the Centrality of Christ in the Old Testament, where I talk about the Christology of the Old Testament. I have a book called Unveiling Mercy, where every day I take a different Hebrew word and I connect that Hebrew word to the work of Christ and to the New Testament. That's a daily devotional called Unveiling Mercy. And then I also have a book, most recent book, called Limping with God, Jacob in the Old Testament Guide to Messy Discipleship, where I unpack the life of Jacob and then relate it to our life as disciples of Jesus. So you can find those on Amazon or at 1517.org. And I also speak around the country about anywhere from 12 to 15 times a year at conferences as well as congregations. So if you're interested in having me as a speaker, then go to 1517.org, and there's a place where you can request a speaker there, and we'll take it from there and engage in conversation about the details. So that's a little bit about me and about what I do. Thanks for stopping by this channel. I pray that these videos may be helpful to you as an individual or your family or your congregation. May they always, in every way, point to the work of Christ as we enjoy that good news, especially here from an Old Testament perspective. Thanks.